For many, many boys, there's still only one way to be a boy, and the penalty for not being that boy is so harsh. So our plea to parents, boy parents, is please be brave enough to give your boy permission to grow into the best version of the person that he chooses to be. And that takes courage. You need to be in his corner as you allow him to bloom, rather than chip away at him to make him an acceptable man.
Hello and welcome to Separate Bathrooms. I'm Brahe-Daddo.
I'm Daddo.
We would like to acknowledge the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation, of which we are recording this podcast on, and the traditional custodians of this land, and pay our respects to the elders both past and present. Hi, sweetheart.
Hey.
Pretty excited about today.
It's a bit of a unique episode today.
We're double dipping. It's our first repeat guests.
Yeah.
Kasey Edwards and Dr. Christopher Scanlon joined us in May of 2021. Season 6, Episode 2, for those playing along, if you'd like to go back and have a listen.
Yeah, Kasey and Christopher came in to talk about their book that they'd written at the time, and it's called Raising Girls Who Like Themselves. Well, they have done it again. A follow-up has been penned and balance has been restored. They've written a book called Bringing Up Boys Who Like Themselves.
Yeah, that's right. The universe can relax now. Parents can have equality and balance on their bookshelves and their bedside tables. We loved talking with Kasey and Christopher, 2 years ago? So let's get them into the bathroom to discuss their new book. Welcome back, Kasey and Christopher, to the bathroom. Welcome back, Kasey and Chris, to the bathroom. You guys have been busy?
We have. Yes, thanks for having us back. To come on twice. What a treat.
I know.
You're the first.
You're the first. Double dippers.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's special.
Now,
Give you a medal for that.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
there'll be a separate bathroom extra roll of toilet paper for you.
There you go. Who
How
gives a
about
crap?
that? Now, who gives a crap? We'll give you a box. Now, Kasey, the last time you said you fell in love with Chris through his writing, your words were, good writing is like porn. You've been deep diving again.
That's true. It's going off at my keyboard.
Woohoo!
Oh my God, I love it.
Yeah, we have to, do it when the girls are at school, when we write.
right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, my husband is dying with this sexual innuendo. It's his favourite thing.
It's the best. It's so naughty.
Look, full disclosure, Kasey and Christopher, we have actually not been able to read your book because we only received our copy this morning. So can you please run us through what this book is about? It's called Bringing Up Boys Who Like Themselves.
Yes, we would love to. So, as you know, we wrote Raising Girls Who Like Themselves 2 years ago.
Yep.
And we wrote that book because we have 2 girls. And it was our mission to find out how we could obviously raise them to like themselves. And that's what inspired the book. But it was actually, it was only a couple of days after Raising Girls Who Like Themselves came out. And we were having coffee with 3 of our friends who were all boy parents. And we were so excited about our book, but our friends were not sharing our excitement. And it was this really profound moment, I think, for us. One of our friends, she started tearing up and she said, my boy doesn't like himself.
Oh.
And then our other friend said, neither does mine. And then we all turned to the third friend and she said, I just don't want to say this out loud, but if I have to, my boy hasn't liked himself for a while. And that was the first time we had got insight into the concerns of parents of boy parents, because we'd been so focused on girls.
Yeah.
But then as soon as the book came out, inundated with emails, text messages. The first speaking event we did, people came up to our signing table and said, what about boys? What about my boy? Shouldn't boys like themselves too? And so, it's like, yes, of course they should. And then we started hearing from boy parents who were buying our book and applying some of the research to their boys.
Okay.
And actually having life-changing results in some of them.
Wow.
Some of the stories that we had. And so that's when we thought, you can't just search and replace girl with boy in our book, right? Because as much as we would love to say we should raise children the same, as soon as our children take their first breath, the world does treat them differently.
Yeah.
So that's why we decided to research. And it really was a deep dive into the research because it was not an area that we'd looked at before. So we dove very deeply and quickly into finding out what we needed to do, what issues boys were facing, what issues parents were worried about with boys, and what they could do to raise their boys to like themselves too.
Chris, were there surprises with this follow-up?
There were, and it was kind of things that I think it was part of the surprise was how we kind of just take boys and growing up for granted. That there seemed to be like there's never any problems with boys, and so I think when we're talking about girls, we're very quick to kind of jump on the problems and talk about them, and there's a whole dialogue that goes around it, and there's lots of resources, and there's whole areas of bringing up boys where there's just silence or there's very few voices. And I think that was one of the surprising things for me at least in writing the book. Just that it was, and often you'd find the same kinds of researchers, writers kind of talking about it, but it wasn't broad, and it wasn't like, it was just like, take an example of something like, friendship in boys. There's not a lot out there written on this because it's like, oh, boys just sort that out, but then you look at the statistics and you look at what happens to men. Like there's been some recent research and recent statistics about men and friendship, and it kind of starts to fall apart in middle adolescence, and by the time men get to late 20s and 30s, often they don't have any friends. They
Interesting.
have, almost none. So it's kind of like then it becomes a conversation. It's like, what happened before then? And so we never really talked about that.
Yeah.
Because we actually teach girls friendship skills. Like for girls, we see it as a skill. And there's all these programs in schools, and we debrief with mum every night, who said what and what I say next time and all of that. But for boys, we don't see it as a skill. They sort it out on the football field, right? And then lonely boys grow up to be lonely men.
That's so interesting because I'm thinking about, we've got 2 girls and a boy, and firstly I was thinking about, both of our girls have been much more verbal about how they look and wish they look like this, and I feel fat and that, and our son has never really been that way, but I'm sure boys might not be saying it out loud, but but doesn't mean that they're not necessarily feeling it, because just our girls, I don't know if they're just a bit more verbose with it, but is that something that you found that the boys just suffer a little bit more quietly than the girls?
Yeah, for sure. So the research shows, certainly with friendship, the boys, when you ask them, up until the age 8, they talk about wanting friends as much as girls, and when you actually prompt them, they will talk about their problems and with friends. But then after 8, they stop talking. And what happens, is that they've just been a boy long enough to know that you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the key messages in our book for friendship, but also for body image, as you talked about, and that's becoming increasingly worrying for boys, is that just because your boy's not saying it doesn't mean it's not a problem. And we've got to be really careful with boys about the things that are flying under the radar, because then we don't get onto them until the small problems are big problems.
Yeah.
So what do we, as parents, do we treat our daughters and sons differently, or don't we treat them differently? And if so, what's the positive way to treat them differently if we need to do that?
Look, I think one of the biggest issues that came out that boy parents are facing, that girl parents are not, is the belief that you have to choose between tough and weak.
Yeah.
So before we started out writing the book, when we were beginning to research, we actually emailed 15,000 parents and said, send us your biggest concerns about boys, give us your biggest, deepest worrying questions, and we'll go and find the answers for you. Yeah. And it was startling the similarities in the answers that we got back. And by far, one of the biggest concerns was, I don't want to raise my son to be tough, but I don't want him to be weak. And if you boiled it down, if the parents were being really honest, if they had to choose between the two, they would choose tough, because nobody wants their kid to be the one that gets slammed up against the locker or kicked in the guts at lunchtime every day. So that was one of the areas of our research. And the good news is that you don't have to choose. In fact, weak is the consequence of tough. When we raise our boys to be tough, we raise them to be brittle. And the brittleness of toughness actually makes them weak. And instead, do you want to explain that? Chris has a really good analogy to describe that.
Yeah, so the analogy that we used in the book is, you got your mobile phone screen protector, and that, once you put that protector on that glass, it's pretty tough. You can throw things at it. It's going to weather the keys in the pocket. You can hit it face on. It can fall on the ground flat, and it's going to be fine. And it's tempered glass. And that's the reason why it's tough, is because there's a whole lot of tension into it, put into it in the production process, and so it's made really, really tough. But as we all know, if we've all dropped our phone, we've all done this, if you drop the phone just at the wrong angle and nick it in the wrong way, it becomes really, really brittle, because all of that tension gets released, and it's then released back out, and usually you get a sort of spider web all over your screen. The phone becomes unusable, often dangerous. I think you can tell where I'm going with this metaphor.
Yeah, that's right.
So you create men, and you kind of have that, and boys, and you create that expectation that they are going to be tough. But that might work for sort of day-to-day stuff, but get in the wrong situation, and that then gets released, and it's quite brittle, and it kind of becomes dangerous, So that's kind of how we kind of explain it, because you say tough, and people think, oh, that's kind of what you want. You want them to be able to weather anything, but that's not always the case.
And so, just to put that a real world example in that, so tough is for men who don't show emotion, who are stoic, right? Strong is actually facing your emotion, having the courage to deal with your emotion rather than outrunning it or offloading it onto someone else because you can't cope, right?
Yeah.
Tough is to not apologize because I don't make mistakes. Yeah. Strong is to have the courage to say, yeah, I made a mistake, let me fix it.
That's so good. That's so good.
I'm just digesting it. Yeah, it is good, because I was going to say, but there has to be a place for the stoic type of behaviour, which does, in that moment where you have to reserve or hold back in order to, I don't know, I'm going to say fix a situation, or you've got to have that moment. You can't allow. It's like going into battle and everything hardens up on you because you've got to get through this moment, and then you give yourself the chance later on to soften.
Yeah, but I think that's part of it, isn't it? It's kind of like knowing that you're going to need that point of release too, and being able to be vulnerable when that's appropriate. So I don't think it's sort of the attitude that you must be tough all the time. That you can never show any.
Because strength is picking your moment when you're going to deal with it. Yeah. Tough is the shattering, being brittle, and losing it. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think just about the human body as well, like people that build and build and build muscle, and yet there's no flexibility. And so their muscle snaps as the first time they go to stretch. I would see this in class all the time, that, yes, they can lift, all this weight, but they can't stretch their arms out further than a certain point because there's not the softness and the flexibility. So it's to have both at the same time.
Yeah.
Another way that toughness is really limiting boys' potential is the inability to deal with failure, to face failure. So what we see with boys, and we hear this a lot from parents, they go, my son's lazy, he's so lazy. I was like, well, one of the reasons boys appear to be lazy is they're so afraid to fail.
Yeah.
Like they don't have the strength to fail. So if you have the strength to actually deal with the uncomfortable feeling of failure. And that takes strength, right? The greatest strength of all is to be able to handle your own feelings. Yeah. If you have the strength to do that, then you can fail and then you can succeed. And so,
I mean, in looking at the statistics, and you would know this much better than me, teenage boys, that's the highest rate of suicide, isn't it? Is in our boys rather than our girls, and that seems to me that speaks a lot to what you're talking about. You know, this fear of failure, not being able to speak to their feelings, feeling like lesser than because they don't feel tough enough to deal with something. So it all just plays out in those statistics.
Just talking about the suicide, part of the toughness that is contributing to this mental health crisis is still the idea that we toughen boys up with shame.
Oh.
So we used to toughen men up on the battlefield. Then we would send them to, the boarding school or whatever. Now there is still a really strong sense that boys are naughty, they're troublemakers, and the way that you turn them into strong men, tough men, is by shaming them. And, make no mistake, nothing good comes from shame. And a lot of the way that we punish boys, which is different from the way we discipline girls, is shame-based.
I remember I went to a private boys' school, Christian Brothers School, and I remember being told by teachers that this year we will shame you. I remember distinctly in grade 8, a teacher telling us that, and that she was quite proud about it. This was kind of part of the educative process. And it was it wasn't just her, it was the culture of the school. that was their main tool of educating boys, I think.
That's incredible.
Awful.
It's incredible.
But it's, as you say,
in the
really
1980s
common.
too.
Right.
Yeah.
So as teachers, are we doing a disservice to our boys and girls at a school level?
There's certainly room for improvement. The rule that we put for parents in our book, which is also for teachers, is that discipline, if you take it to its core, the definition of discipline is to learn. It is not to punish. It's not to inflict pain or put our own feelings onto a child. So anytime we discipline, we have to make sure we are helping rather than hurting. And now think of, when are you at your best? When are you able to grow, admit that you made a mistake, feel safe to do better? It's not when you're being shamed. It's not when you're afraid that someone's going to take away your iPad. It's not when you're going to not be able to play at lunchtime. It's when you're in a safe environment and you can have a conversation of, that's not really how we do things. That's not how you're going to get the result you want. Let's talk about what we can do next time. That is the place where a child can grow and learn without shame.
Yeah.
Have you been lecturing the Collingwood football coach, Craig McRae? It seems that that's how he's coaching Collingwood right now, getting the best out of those guys. It's amazing. Because I reckon you can plug half of this stuff into, having young men read this book as well. In what you're talking about right now, there's a lot to learn for even not just parents bringing up boys, but also I reckon young men can read this and go, I can make these shifts for myself.
Absolutely. And we have given talks at schools about this, primarily the girls' book. But, I'd say the same thing for the boys' book. And teachers kind of reflect on kind of their, their own upbringing, and then how they were parented into their teaching. A lot of parents have talked to us about how they've read the book and then thought about how reparenting themselves.
Yeah.
And I think there is truth about it. So if anyone from the Collingwood Football Club would like our consulting, we can talk.
Mate, I'm thinking any coach at any level could get something out of this.
Yeah.
Because
with any boys,
Yeah.
We have an example in our book, and we want parents to reflect on. Imagine you're at work and you stuff up. Whether it was intentional or a mistake, it doesn't matter, because often when we discipline boys, the why doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
So imagine you make a mistake, you get called into your boss's office, he yells and screams at you, he punishes you by telling you you're not going to get your bonus, he threatens you that you're going to lose your job. Now, what are you going to do in that moment? First of all, you're probably going to lie to cover your ass, right? To blame someone else. that is not a time when you're going to have an honest conversation, a time of deep reflection to grow and be better next time. You're going to walk out of that office, get on to Seek and find another job so you don't have to work with your prick of a boss anymore, right?
Yeah.
So if we want our kids to learn and grow and be better people, then we've got to create an environment where they can do that.
So as much as, we look at our girls and go, oh, honey, you're so pretty, and that's it, all they get commentary-wise. Or I don't know if boys get, oh, look at how strong you are. I don't know. What are the questions that we should be asking our boys? What are the comments that we should be saying to them?
Well, one question that every parent can do right now is not how are you doing, how are you going, but how are you feeling?
Yeah.
And so the research is remarkable in this, that if you can actually get a boy, or any person actually, to accurately describe their feeling, if they can say how they are feeling accurately, then you go most of the way to resolving that feeling. So just an example that happened to me the other day, I was at a body corporate meeting for our apartment. And if you've ever been to one of those, they don't go well usually. And this one really wasn't going well.
True.
And things were said. And anyway, I left that meeting and I was what I thought was angry. I was so angry. It filled my whole day with this rage. And then the next morning I was talking to Chris about it. And I realised I wasn't angry. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed by how I had behaved. And just by saying that to a safe person how I felt, I instantly felt better. And so when we help our boys learn to accurately identify and articulate what they're feeling, we can actually change their lives, because that can short circuit the distress and stop it building up and exploding in anger.
Yeah.
Mind you, the owner of Lot 10 was in the wrong there still. I maintain that, so I'm not letting go.
Give them out the name, Kasey. We'll shame them on air.
Time to walk away, Chris. Step back from the barbecue, mate. Can I ask you this? You guys mentioned in our chat a couple of years ago that in traditional relationships, the male has always had more power, more status. Then you asked the question, why does the man have to be more powerful to be desirable? Do you tackle that in your book? What are your thoughts on that now?
Not directly, because our book's targeted at toddler to tween.
Okay.
But what we do tackle indirectly is the idea that you need to help your boy to learn the skills to relate effectively to half of the population. That if you want your boy to not grow up lonely, then he needs to be able to have meaningful connections with women. And if he grows up in a world where girls are seen as inferior, and he will, unless we explicitly counteract that, because, if you throw badly, you throw like a girl.
Yeah.
If you run slow, you run like a girl. You're a pussy or whatever. Like everywhere in our culture, boys will learn that girls are weak and girls do not command the same respect. And if your boy's going to grow up and have a female boss, a female partner, people in his life, his colleagues who could be friends, but you cannot have a meaningful relationship with someone you don't respect. So, and that extends to the romantic relationships. If you really want to not be lonely in your marriage, then you need to be able to have the skills and the awareness and the strength of character to treat your partner as equal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great answer.
I'm always fascinated with, I feel like you can always tell when a boy has grown up in a family of sisters. He's been the only boy. There's something about, and they've had good relationships with their sisters and their mum. Like there's always something about them that they, I read a story about this young man who had noticed a girl on the bus had her period and she'd leaked through her school uniform, and he just quietly whispered in her ear, I've got sisters. He said, you can borrow my jumper to tie around your waist. And I just thought, that is a well-raised young man. How beautiful is that? But we need to do that whether they've got sisters or not.
I was going to say, if you don't have a sister, you're SOL, aren't you?
Yeah, you really need to bring
Well,
that.
something we say in our book is there is no need to hide your period or your period products from your son at any age. Like, it's not helpful for boys to grow up not knowing how the bodies of half the population work.
Yes.
I came across a couple of ideas that filtered through my men's team socials. I want to run these by you because I think it's important. Children learn to respect and undermine a father's authority through their mother. If the mother has no appreciation for the husband's leadership, neither will the kids. What do you think about that thought? Yeah, right?
Yeah, the husband's leadership.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Red flag.
Yeah, I mean, and I say this because this is what's filtering through. This is something that's coming through quite strongly through men's social platforms.
Yeah.
Interesting.
These ideas.
I would say that that's a perfect example of toughness. If you have to be in control in your relationship as the man, then what happens on that moment when you're not? Like, what happens to the children and the wife when you're not? What happens to you if your whole identity is based on dominating other people? And so that's another difference between tough and strong, that strength is an internal resource. You can like yourself all the time. Tough is you only like yourself when you're the leader of the household, when you're dominating someone else. And in that moment when you're not, then you can't like yourself anymore. So having that attitude is not only bad for everyone else in the family, it's really bad for you. And that's the approach that we took with this book, because there's also a lot of beating up on boys. And we also found that boy parents were feeling a bit bruised, because it's like all the problems of the world, they're, straight white man, and I'm raising a white man, it could be a straight white man. So what we wanted to do with the book is every single strategy in here is good for the boy and in turn will be good for the world. And I would say raising your boy to show leadership in the family is not good for him.
Yeah. Well, based on that one, I mean, you're probably going to answer this the same way. Check out this one. This is, kindness will only be appreciated when people become aware that you are capable of harming them, either physically or mentally.
Yeah, I gasped too, Kasey.
Yeah.
See, this is really disturbing, and I really worry that society's not changing as much as we think it is. Like, when you hear this, like, that could be 200 years ago, right?
Yeah, right.
That you actually have to harm people for them to respect you.
Yeah, and the underneath that it said, you will never be told this. This will never be said out loud. So, as a men's mental health champion for the cause, I don't know how to answer people when stuff like I haven't studied it. I'm just going off my own and what I'm learning from talking to other people. So hearing your ideas about this, how to
Well, I would say
respond.
it's really not good for the man to think that he has to cause harm in order to be appreciated.
And to understand kindness.
Yes.
That's your measure?
Yeah.
Like, oh, boy.
Because it doesn't go together. Those two things don't go together, do they? Harm and kindness are completely opposite.
Yeah. So it's not kindness, it's fear. Yeah. Isn't it? I fear you. I'll suck up to you because I'm scared of you. That's not kindness.
Yeah. And it sounds like schoolyard bullying to me. So what about men today, or boys today? Are they more confused now than ever about what it is to be a young boy than previous generations? Or are we just shining a light on it more? What do you think?
I don't know whether they are. I actually think that kids, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about reasonably young kids, sort of, in the tween years, I think they just take whatever they see as it comes, and they kind of so if they hear messages which are kind of about being all kinds of different ways to be a boy and to be a man, they just accept that. Yeah. And they just internalise it. I think as they get older, they might start to get different kinds of messages, and perhaps not say the things that they actually want to say and be true to themselves. They might start to, censor themselves, move into a particular idea about what they think a boy or a man should be. But I think that if you get that early enough, if you get those conversations, then that's a resource that they can draw upon when they get out and they get a little bit older as well, and they can start to reimagine what a man is.
Yeah.
Just going back to that question of men and leadership. I actually think that's a really important to actually have men and boys express that and say, what do they think a boy or a man has to be? And I think that conversation, in some ways, it's really good that you hear those conversations rather than they just sit under the surface and people feel like, oh, I'm not going to say that. I think that's really, really important, because one of the things that we know, you can't really deal with these things until they come out in the open. And I was reading it recently about, or listening to a podcast actually about Andrew Tate, the sort of in the manosphere. And one of the things that Andrew Tate, and he's kind of the extreme.
Yeah.
So this is really the extreme. He has trained his audience on the sorts of things that they are going to hear. If you say, I agree with or I like Andrew Tate, he's already trained his audience. So if you start to saying, that's terrible, it's the worst thing ever, and start banning it, then that kind of makes it more appealing and more attractive, because they already know Tate's already told me that people are going to have this response. So the argument is, or the approach is better, is, mate, tell me about that. Tell me about Andrew Tate. Why does he appeal to you? So start that conversation. And I think even when you go back to things like, what does it mean to be a boy? What does it mean to be a man? Does it mean you have to lead? Does it mean you have to be tough, stoic, or whatever all the time? If you can start that conversation and keep that open, then you're going to get to a much better place.
Yeah.
And boys need more champions to allow them to do that.
Yeah.
So you look at girls, there are an army of women in many girls' lives who are fighting for their right to be anything that they please, right?
Yeah.
We've got mums and aunties and teachers and, the whole feminist
Whole school
movement.
programs.
Yeah,
All
right.
the programs in schools for girls to be anything, right?
And they should be there, by the way.
Exactly,
We're not
for
suggesting
sure.
that they should be go away. They're great.
But for boys, for many, many boys, there's still only one way to be a boy. And the penalty for not being that boy is so harsh. So our plea to parents, boy parents, is please be brave enough to give your boy permission to grow into the best version of the person that he chooses to be. And that takes courage. You need to be in his corner as you allow him to bloom, rather than chip away at him to make him an acceptable man.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
What do you two think is the greatest threat to our boys growing up balanced today?
I'd say it's still. We talk about this in the book. There's this idea called the man box, and it's a lot of work that's been done by a whole bunch of researchers, activists around boys and men. Comes out of Jesuit Social Services. They've done a lot of stuff on this. And the idea of the man box is that there's still this very narrow model that men often have. And it goes back to, things like the role...
Must be the leader in the family.
Yeah.
And it's things like, the fact that men in popular culture are often presented with very narrow range of attractive role models. And so they feel that they have to conform to that, and they put themselves in a box. And I still think that is still quite prevalent. And that's why it's so important to try and get that out of boys, get them talking about it, and naming it, and then unpacking it and helping them escape the man box.
Because the research shows that the boys who subscribe to the man box values, now that's different from having to sometimes perform the man box values, right? Sometimes a kid's going to have to perform toughness, probably, to save his skin, or, you're going to have to sometimes go along with the crowd, right? But if you subscribe to them, if you believe that they're true, that a man must always be in charge, that you never back away from a fight, that violence is an acceptable option, those values, that you never show your feelings, you never show vulnerability, if you believe in those, you have a much higher risk of suicide. You're far more likely to be in a car accident. You've got a higher rate of alcohol, drug addiction. You do worse in the workplace. Loneliness. So this idea, clinging on to the idea of being a real man, it's now, the research is very clear how it harms men.
Who do you feel is a worthy role model out there for boys right now?
Oh, Bandit on Bluey. I think because he like that character is nurturing. He's involved. He's funny. Like it's kind of it's a really nice mix of kind of a I have to go to a cartoon dog for a role model, but
that actually highlights the problem.
Yeah,
the fact that the first one he came to was a cartoon, and so male role models came up a lot in our research, particularly from single mums.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, they're desperate for their kid to have a male role model, but they just don't know where they are. And I think one of the mistakes that people make is anyone who pees standing up can be a male role model. And that is not the case. You know, for female role models, they have to meet certain criteria. They actually have to be good role models, right? So we can't make the mistake of thinking that any man is a good role model, right? But something for the single mums to feel a bit better about is we did an interview with somebody who had run a childcare centre for 30 years. And she said that she felt that single mothers actually had an advantage because they got to choose the men who were influencing their children.
Interesting.
And that no role model is better than a bad one.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I can see
and
that.
we can't tell you how many times we have heard from mums saying, how do I get my husband on board?
Yeah. And it's cracking that genetic code, isn't it, where we hand down the same, issues and that same, be a man. I hate that term. Be a man, grow up, grow some balls, like all of that just language. Don't be so gay, as
but
you were
the
saying.
girls are saying it too. The girls,
there's policing.
The girls are saying it. The girls will say to the guys, grow up
Absolutely.
hair. It happens at my life-saving thing. Something I'll throw but it's a joke. But it's like, come on, fellas, grow up hair.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, this is a 19-year-old girl yelling it at a bunch of boomers.
Wow.
And Gen Xers. Yeah, and I'm like, holy crap! This is not just. This is a big thing. This sweeps across generations.
That's really, really important. It's not an
gender.
individual decision.
Yeah.
It's kind of a culture, and it doesn't matter how old you are. You pick up into that culture and you buy into it. And there's a penalty for stepping outside of it and going against the grain too. So,
and so we spoke to a lot of dads who, they don't want to essentially make their kid tough.
Yeah.
But they were boys in the schoolyard.
Yeah.
And they know the penalty and of being weak, right? So they are deliberately, as an act of love, as misguided as it is, trying to toughen their boy up to spare him from that, which is why circling back to where we started, it's so important to think about strong.
Yeah.
Rather than tough. But it exists today. Like we heard a story of a man not wanting his boy to sit on the swing with another boy. All right, you tell the story.
You're going.
Because, he's not into dudes.
Yeah.
Like the kids are 2.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. And the level of homophobia is like incredible. It's just like, and that's kind of, this is where that seed is planted.
Yeah.
And, and it's just reinforced from that day on.
And so what I'd say to these parents who are worried about their child not being accepted in the schoolyard, is that it is far worse for them not to feel accepted at home.
Okay.
Right?
Absolutely.
If your boy grows up feeling like he can't be what daddy expects him to be, I would say that that's far worse than him being supported and nurtured at home, given skills, given strategies, so he can go into the world as his authentic self and come back to his safe haven at home.
Yeah. Yeah. If you've got that at home, you've got so much. Just a shout out again to the Rudolf Steiner school ways of, our kids were raised this way. I work in a Steiner school, and one of the things that I've always loved is in the early childhood, they put the baby dolls into the little boys' arms. They don't have, you do trucks, the girls do this. That all the children are treated equally and nurtured equally. There isn't a gender bias. There isn't a gender. They don't see the gender. They actually think it's more important for the boys to be the nurturer. And so they want them to do the cooking, the little ones, they want them to look after the baby, and, daddy can look after so just those little things at that early age. I've always loved that about You know, I mean, I'm sure other, kindergartens and preschools might do that too, but I just know that the Steiner education does that really well.
And that's not just good for the world, it's good for the boys. Because
Yes.
how fragile and brittle are you if you can't even look after yourself?
Yeah.
Like all
that's
these
right.
men who can't cook a meal, can't wash their clothes, can't need someone to look after themselves. These big, tough guys who can't meet their basic needs.
Yeah.
That's pretty brittle.
Yeah. So true.
I just want to leave this with something. It's a great gift for parents of boys you leave them with. How to give your boy the gift of rock-solid confidence and self-belief. Can you just share some of that info with us?
Yeah, so the foundation of that is being able to do life. Like we just talked about, you don't actually have rock-solid confidence and self-belief if you can't feed yourself, right? And so something that happens with girls is that girls are encouraged to do things at home. Boys and girls, little boys and girls want to help out, right? When they're young. But then girls continue to do that because it's expected of them, but boys don't. One boy told us that, doing chores, being kind, helping people was for chicks and losers.
Okay.
But what he just said out loud was an attitude. Like, men don't volunteer as much. They don't help out, right? So boys are missing out on basic skills that you require to feel like a competent person. So that's one of the principles of that is only do for your child what they can't do for themselves, right? You have to encourage your boy. Don't raise little princelings. You've got to encourage them to do things and to upskill. And then part of also rock-solid confidence and self-belief is being strong enough to deal with failure. Do you want to pick up that one?
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's kind of what we saw again and again, is that boys often they're not aware of fail, and it's that idea of failing well, so that they kind of learn from it. This is because it's going to happen, and they in that process of trying and failing and picking themselves back up again, they develop mastery. You can't do it for them. They're going to have to try and fail again. But I think also the key thing is, and just back to what Kasey was saying there about helping and looking after themselves, but also looking after others as well. And it goes back to the Steiner principle too, of kind of being, looking after others. And if you think about it, that's a very traditional male role model. We actually do have that in our past, the idea that men looked after each other. And we kind of narrowed that down into protection, but there's no reason why we can't draw on that. So it's not about completely throwing out every part of traditional masculinity. It's about going and retrieving and maybe even expanding some of those ideas that, you're going to look after others, that you're going to try, that you're going to master things. But through that, in that process, you are going to fail, so get used to it. And having our boys be okay with that.
And just one other thing about that is to build a boy's confidence, you have to build his identity on what he can do rather than on what he can't do. And so just getting back to the shaming and the punishing, and we're so focused on correcting boys' weaknesses that they come to define themselves as I'm the kid who sucks at maths, or I'm the kid who's always in trouble at school. They need to define themselves as I'm a boy who's really thoughtful, or I can run really fast, or I'm really good on the trampoline, or whatever it is. So it's about finding your boy's strengths and working and nurturing the strengths. So if you want to correct your boy's weaknesses, the most important thing to do is to spend most of your time on his strengths. Because then he'll say, I'm really good on the trampoline and I'm a really funny kid, but I need a little bit of extra help with maths. Whereas if you're totally focused on maths, he's not going to want to practice. He's going to shut down. He's going to have low self-esteem because all he is the kid who can't do maths.
So good. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, I could talk to you guys for ages.
This is so good. This is so important. As you say, Kasey, it's not just changing the lives of boys, it's changing how the boys are in the world, and then it changes the planet, because we need more vulnerable men. We need more vulnerability from the men. We need more strength, because then those men support themselves, they support women, they support the children.
Well, and their family, and then the community. That's the ripple effect you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is wonderful. So the book is bringing up boys who like themselves. Kasey Edwards and Dr. Christopher Scanlon. You guys are unreal. Thank you for being our first two-time, our first repeat guests.
If you write
It was
another
worth
book,
it.
you'll come back again.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We on this podcast we get told we're awesome. We're coming back.
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff.
We only highlight the positive here. And we say we're working on the other stuff.
That's right.
It's development. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for your time, you two. How great to have them back.
I love
Because
it.
their first book was so wonderful. So I am really excited about this book. And I think it's going to be a great book to be gifting parents of newborn boys. So they've got a little bit of a Bible to read to assist them.
All that talk about brittle and stuff just made me think about lollies, because I'm thinking about a brittle caramel bar that smashes.
Splinters.
It splinters and you can't get it back. But when you've got a soft caramel bar that just bends,
That's right.
and so I'm just needing to go get some food and digest the whole thing.
Yeah, good idea. Thanks so much for listening, everyone.
Bye for now.